Welcome, my friends, to our Q&A session dedicated to the exploration of the ways that we can use harmonious strength training to help us heal chronic pain. Why are we looking at strength training as the healing modality? Well, it's because most people who suffer from pain don't suffer from it because they're too strong. Most people suffer from injuries, chronic tension, or pain because they're not strong. In this culture, and probably many cultures throughout the world, people confuse tension for strength. So they think that if they're tense, that means they're strong. And well, it's actually quite wrong, because most people are not strong when they're tense. Quite on the contrary, it's an expression of weakness. If you are holding tension, it means your muscles are working hard. Why are they working hard? Because you're super strong? Probably not. Most likely, your muscles are working hard because you are not as strong as you could be. So, the chain breaks at the weakest link, as they say. Why? Well, because if one link of the chain is weaker than other links, that's where the chain is the weakest. So in other words, the strength of the chain is measured by the strength of its weakest link. Well, the same thing happens with us. Our human bodies break down or malfunction at the area of least strength. In other words, wherever we are weakest, most likely we are going to have pain or some other disability. So, what do we do about that? Well, we can do a lot of things, but the most intelligent and probably most effective way to address that is actually by strengthening those areas of weakness. If you have weakness, well, wouldn't you want to strengthen that part of the body that is not very strong? And that's exactly what we're going to learn. We're going to learn both how to identify the areas of weakness and how to bring greater strength to them. Now, the greater strength that we are bringing to the areas of weakness is not accomplished by the way that most people think of strength training. Perhaps you have done all kinds of strength training exercises, lifting weights, or using exercise machines. This is something that you might have seen many times in gyms and health clubs, or in plenty of other places where people hope to achieve greater strength. Well, there are pros and cons to everything. And there are more cons to weightlifting than harmonious strength training. And I will explain why in just a few minutes. But first, let me look into what it is that we mean by strength and how it affects pain. So, if we look at the musculoskeletal system of the body, most muscles have muscles antagonists. So, for example, if there is a muscle flexor that flexes the arm at elbow, there is also a muscle extensor that extends the arm at the elbow. The flexor is called the biceps. Well, actually, there are more than one flexors. For example, there is a biceps, there is also brachialis, and even brachioradialis also involved in flexion of the elbow. Most flexion is done by contracting biceps and brachialis. And then there is triceps that extends the arm at the elbow. And if muscles, extensors and flexors are more or less in balance in terms of their strength, you can rely on both of those muscle groups because they will be available whenever you need them, and they're not going to hold a due tension when you don't need it. However, most people don't have that kind of balance between muscles antagonists. Why? Maybe they were born deficient. Most likely they developed these imbalances through their upbringing, and often through the practice of strength training that they've done in gyms. Let me explain. When you lift weights or do any type of exercises at the gym, most likely, if you are like any people I know, you focus on the muscles that you can see in the mirror. And which muscles can you see in the mirror? Mostly the muscles in front of your body. So, most likely you will be training the biceps at the expense of the triceps. Most likely you will be exercising the pecs, the muscles of the chest, at the expense of muscles of the upper back, such as trapezius and rhomboids. Most likely you will be exercising the abs. You know, people want to have six-pack abs. Nobody wants to have six-pack backs. So the back muscles are left behind, pun intended. They literally don't get as much exercise as the muscles of the front. The same applies to quadriceps, for example, the muscles in the front of the thighs as opposed to hamstrings, the muscles in the back, and many other parts of the body. Even the same muscle group may receive more training in that part that is visible in the mirror, and the one that is less visible or invisible in the mirror doesn't get as much training. What am I talking about? Well, for example, deltoids. The anterior deltoids and medial deltoids can be seen in the mirror relatively well. The posterior delts can't be seen so well. So guess what? Most people put a lot more emphasis on training their anterior deltoids, the part of the deltoid muscle in front of the shoulder, as compared to posterior deltoid, the part of the muscle that is located behind the shoulder joint. It's the same muscle group, but the front gets a lot more training than the back. Now, interestingly enough, deltoid is one of those few muscle groups that actually work as its own antagonist, meaning the anterior deltoid can actually serve as the antagonist of the posterior deltoid. I'm sorry, I'm throwing you some Latin at you. I don't know what else to call those muscles. Shoulder muscles, okay. So the muscles in front of the shoulder often can serve as the antagonist of the muscle in the back of the shoulder, even though it's the same muscle group. It just kind of envelopes your shoulder joint from both front and back and side. And guess what? If the frontal part of that muscle group receives a lot more training, it will be stronger. The muscle in the back of the shoulder is not going to receive as much attention, is not going to receive as much training. It will remain weaker. But if they're antagonists of each other, they're constantly pulling the arm towards themselves. So the anterior delts are pulling the arm forward, the posterior pull the arm backwards. And guess which one's going to win? The one that's stronger, right? The one that is stronger is actually going to prevail over the one that is weaker. In other words, the weaker muscle will be either losing the tug-of-war game. Well, your arm would be like this all the time if the posterior muscle just stopped working completely. But it doesn't stop. What it does, it works over time. It works harder in terms of the percentage of its full capacity. So if the front of the shoulder muscle is, say, twice as strong as the back of the shoulder muscle, the front of the shoulder muscle may be working only 40% of its full capacity. The back is going to be working at 80%. It's almost full capacity. No wonder it's going to be sore and overwhelmed with so much work. Even when you're relaxed and you think that your arm muscle is not doing anything, they're still operating at some relatively low percentage of its full capacity, maybe 5% or 10% if you're a little tense. Well, guess what? Still, the back muscles will be working twice as hard as the muscles in the front. They will be holding twice as much tension, which actually will create impingements in the blood vessels and nerves, and will actually contribute to what we call a rotator cuff injury or rotator cuff dysfunction, often attributed to those muscles that we don't see in the mirror. Well, guess what? Most of the muscles of rotator cuff group are not seen in the mirror, and so most of them don't get any training, or hardly any training. So no wonder people suffer from rotator cuff injuries, because those muscles are weak. And if you just exert a little bit extra effort, they get overwhelmed, go into spasm, or even get injured. That's exactly what happens to weak muscles. Now, do we want to be weak? I hope not. We want to be strong as much as we can. How do we do that? Well, we literally have to strength train ourselves. We literally need to improve our balance between the antagonists and protagonists. Another example of a muscle antagonist that you actually can see in a mirror only part of, and that is upper trapezius. Upper trap lifts the shoulder up towards the ear. Now, the lower part of that same muscle actually serves as an antagonist. It helps pull the shoulder down. And again, the same thing happens. The visible part of the muscle group is often going to get a lot more training than the part of the muscle group that is not visible in the mirror. So if you don't see your lower traps, often you will neglect them. Unless you are an experienced bodybuilder that actually pays attention to what the back looks like. You know, they participate in this bodybuilding contests and maybe get photographed from behind or videotaped from behind. So they actually kind of get to know a little bit what their back looks like. So they may give a little bit more attention to their lower traps. But still, the antagonists often will feel like, oh wow, I can't have the same strength because I haven't trained those muscles. And if I don't train those muscles, they will often get overwhelmed, overworked, and underpaid. And what does it feel like? It feels like pain in the back. It's not the lower back pain that often people complain about. And actually, one of the top reasons people come to see doctors, except for during the pandemic, of course. On average, most people come to see doctors because they have musculoskeletal pain. And number one cause of pain or area of complaint is actually back. Why? Because the back muscles don't get as much attention and don't receive as much training as the muscles of the front. I was just joking about how nobody wants to have six-pack backs. It's not actually a joke. It's true. Nobody wants to train their backs as nearly as much as they train their front of the abs muscles. And guess what? Often personal trainers say, oh, you have lower back pain. Well, you need to train your core muscles. And what do they call the core muscles? For whatever reason, they call the abs the core muscles, which is completely asinine. By definition, the core muscles are muscles that connect to your spine. Well, the rectus abdominis, the muscle that goes up and down in front of your abs, does not connect to the spine. It connects to the rib cage and sternum up here and goes down to the pubic bone down there. Now, there is another muscle, also called abdominal muscle, that actually connects to the spine. It's called transversus abdominis, and it goes perpendicular to the rectus abdominis. It goes like this, like a belt, around your waistline. Now, those muscles do connect to the vertebra. They are core muscles. But these are not the muscles that most of the personal trainers are thinking of. They think of the wrong abs. And so they tell the clients, when you have lower back pain, you need to train your abs. And so they do all kinds of stupid things like crunches and sit-ups and planks, which actually adds insult to injury. Because if the front muscles are already overwhelming the muscles of the back, then guess what? Training the front muscles will only make it worse. The back muscles are the ones that need training. They are the ones that need to get stronger to catch up with the strength of the muscles of the front. Why? Well, because if you have lower back pain, it means the muscles of the front are stronger than muscles of the back. Now, if you did not resist the strength of the front muscles, you would just go into question mark holding pattern. But if you're not doing the question mark holding pattern, it means your weaker muscles of the back are still somehow trying to resist the strength of the muscles of the front, your abs. How do they do it? Well, by working harder. If the abs are working maybe at 10% of their full capacity, the lower back muscles are working at 20 or even 30 or even higher percentage of their full capacity because they're so much weaker. So what do we need to do? We need to train them. We need to give them exercise. We need to bring them online so that they would be on par with the strength of the muscles of the front. Now, of course, you could also say, well, we need to make the muscles of the front weaker. But nobody wants that. Nobody wants flabby abs. So we want to basically create greater strength of those muscles we don't see in a mirror. And those are the muscles of the back. And by the way, it's not just the lower back. Most of those muscles, with the exception of QL, the Granus lumborum, are actually not just the lower back muscles. They go through the entire length of the spine. Like rector spinatus, and they basically engage the entire spine in extension. Even neck muscles are the back of the neck muscles actually are the same muscle group as the muscles of the lower back. It's just different segments of that muscle. They're not as segmented as the abs, so if you don't have any fat in your skin, you basically will have the abs forming the six packs, even if you don't train them very much. Basically, everybody has six-pack abs. They just cover it up with fat. But what we need to do is we need to understand how to train the muscles of the back so that they would be as strong as the muscles of the front, and then we will not have the back pain. The spine also will come into a more natural, balanced alignment. And when the spine is in alignment, we will not have the vertebrae grinding on each other because there's going to be space between the vertebrae occupied with discs. The spinal discs will actually find their home where they belong. They will not be bulging or being compressed. And basically, the entire spine will function properly, supporting the weight of the body. Now, if the muscles of the front are stronger than the muscles of the back, they often win the tug of war, even if you don't assume the question mark holding pattern. It may still pull the rib cage further down and create what we call kyphosis. Kyphosis is when you lose lumbar curve. And if you don't have lumbar curve, it means the weight of the body is not distributed on the spine. Now, if the weight is not distributed on the spine, something else has to compensate for the lack of structural integrity. What would that be? Well, there would be muscles of the back that keep you from falling over in your face. So basically what happens is that the muscles of the front won the tug-of-war game, and now they actually take it easy. The muscles of the back lost in the tug-of-war because they're weaker, and now they actually have to hold tension so that you don't collapse. Basically, they're compensating for lack of structural alignment of the body and doing the job that the bones are supposed to do. Now, muscles are never as strong as bones. And they burn energy, which obviously, when muscles hold tension, they also get tired. And when they get tired, they start sending signals to the central nervous system. I'm overworked and underpaid. What's up with that? Then they go on strike, or they go in spasm. And the spasm is basically when the muscle is operating at 100% of its full capacity, or even pushed over the edge. And that's not pleasant. That's when the central nervous system receives the alarm signal from that muscle group, there is something really wrong going on. I can't function anymore. And central nervous system, of course, sends signals to that muscle group. Well, here, more signals to contract so that you don't allow the body to collapse. And so basically, that's when people have lower back pain, and then they rush to the doctors and maybe even get chiropractic adjustments. So the chiropractor may actually push the bones back into place and fix you so that you are not looking like you're about to fall apart. But then you get off the chiropractic table and you stand up and you have to deal with the same gravity again. And if your muscles are still in that same kind of balance, you're going to revert to your habitual holding pattern within minutes or hours, maybe days. It's great for chiropractic business, but it's a crappy healing approach because it does not address the root cause. Now, how do we address the root cause? Now, if any chiropractors are watching me right now, I apologize for criticizing your healing modality. You are doing a fantastic work to the extent you know what to do, and maybe you know more about it than me. Then I'm more than willing to learn something about your modality that I don't know. And I know a bit about a few of healing modalities because I've studied extensively. However, there are more efficient ways to approach this issue, and one of them is by actually addressing the root causes of this imbalance. And the root causes often boil down to the lack of training of those muscles that we don't see in a mirror, we never pay enough attention to, or even if we do exercise them, we don't do it efficiently. What kind of exercises do people do for the muscles of the lower back? Well, there are several. For example, some people just do deadlifts. Doesn't sound good, but that's what they do. They basically grab a weight and start lifting the weight like this. This is the deadlift. Now, can you imagine a power lifter lifting a really heavy weight? It would break their back if they did this kind of things. There's no way to lift anything heavy enough. But that's what a lot of people do. They do deadlifts with too heavy of a weight. And then they wonder how come they can't function the following day or two. They just feel totally decrepit because they overwork those weak muscles. In other words, they go gung-ho and experience what I call weekend warrior syndrome. They basically are not mindful of the edges of their comfort zone. Now, if you're not one of those people and you've done some training for the back, kudos to you. Sometimes you don't even need any weights. Sometimes you can just use the weight of your own arms. How does that work? Well, basically, you can just extend the arms above your head, and the weight of your arms can actually do enough. And you don't have to go all the way down or all the way up. You can actually just simply go back and forth like this. Now, if you don't have enough flexibility of the hamstrings, you will not be able to assume this position. If your shoulders are frozen, you will not be able to extend the arms. So for those of you who have these kind of issues, there may be a better way to go. What is it? It's engaging the muscles antagonists to provide the resistance to the muscles in question that we're trying to exercise. What does that look like? Well, it looks like this. I'm going to engage my abs against the muscles of the back. I'm literally going to crunch my abs, resisting with the muscles of my back, and then I'm going to go into extension, providing resistance with the abs. Look at the ceiling. And then look at the floor. Now, my shoulders are not really doing anything, so whether or not you can extend the arms above your head is irrelevant. And you're not even bending over so much so that your hamstrings are not going to get overstretched. You're just simply engaging the muscle's antagonists. And guess what? The stronger muscle will provide more resistance. The weaker muscle will provide less resistance. So if the lower back muscles are weaker, they will not provide as much resistance. So the abs are not going to get much stronger. The abs, on the other hand, are providing reasonable amount of resistance so that the back muscles actually get trained. That's how we create more balance. So once again, we look at the floor, not just bending my head by cranking my neck, but actually bending my torso. Then look at the ceiling. And again, look at the floor, and look at the ceiling. I may also tilt my pelvis a little bit. Yeah, you can try it right now. When you look down at the floor, you can thrust the pelvis or tilt it posteriorly. So you eliminate lumbar curve completely, kind of tuck the tailbone down, and then perk up the tailbone when you look at the ceiling. So the pelvis goes into extension. And again, look at the floor, and look at the ceiling. You also are welcome to synchronize these movements with your physiological functions. What do I mean by that? Well, what would be easier for you, to inhale or to exhale when you're looking at the floor? That's right, it would be a lot easier to exhale. That's what your body needs to do. You exhale when looking at the floor, inhale as you start going up. If you go slowly, you can even do this. You can exhale as you look at the floor, inhale as you slowly straighten up, stop inhaling as you reach the vertical alignment of the spine, and then exhale as you look at the ceiling. And then again, inhale while you're straightening your torso up, and exhale again as you look down at the floor. Going slower is better for you. Why? Because, well, we're talking about developing mindfulness. If you go a little bit slower, you will be able to become more aware of subtle shifts, changes, tensions, or discomfort, or imbalances in your body as compared to going fast. So it stands to reason that it would make sense to go slow. That's why I gave you a suggestion to actually slow down your pace, cut it down by about half. So you exhale when you look at the ceiling and at the floor, and inhale as you are more or less in a straight vertical position of the torso. I hope it makes sense. Now, this is not the only exercise for the lower back muscles, but this is a great one because it's going to make the most difference in terms of addressing the root causes of lower back pain. Now, for some people, there may be more pain on one side than the other. And in those cases, often it is the QLs that are the muscles that are in spasm, more on one side than the other. QL is the muscle right here at the small of the back on the side of the spine. It connects the 12th rib to the iliacus crest, to the pelvis. And so basically, that muscle pulls on the 12th rib. Now, there is another muscle antagonist between the 12th and 11th rib, but it's a lot smaller than QL. And so the intercostal may not be as strong as the QL, or when the QL goes into spasm, it's almost guaranteed to overpower that intercostal muscle between the 12th and 11th ribs. Guess what's going to happen? It's going to dislocate the 12th rib. And it's going to feel crappy. And most people don't understand the cause of that sense of malaise. It just feels really uncomfortable because the rib is dislocated. And we need to actually bring that ribbon to its natural aligned position and release the tension in the QL muscle. But then we also need to train that QL muscle so that it becomes stronger, so it doesn't go into spasms. Strong muscles don't spaz out. It's the weak ones that go into spasms. For example, just imagine for a moment that you train only one of your arms. For whatever bizarre reason, you decided, I'm only going to train my right arm. And I'm going to lift weights with it, and I'm going to just make it really strong. So maybe with the right arm, you can lift 50-pound weight, no problem. Try to lift it with the left arm that has not received as much training, and your left arm will be feeling like, oh my God, it's about to fall off, or it's going to scream, like I'm operating at the edge of my full capacity. And if you just try one too many times, your muscles will go into spasm. Well, it's a pretty simple example of how a weak muscle is not the one that is going to be able to perform well. Instead, it will malfunction, and basically spasm is an example of malfunction. And what happens is that we need to first relieve the spasm. And then we can train the muscle so that it becomes stronger. If the muscle is in spasm, many people think, well, I need to stretch this muscle because it's contracted, it's short, and that's just wrong. That hurts. Well, when people stretch the muscles, it's like stretching a rubber band. You stretch it, and you let it go, and it snaps. You stretch it, let it go, and it snaps. Well, basically, same thing happens with the muscles. You stretch the muscle. If it is still tense, the muscle is not stupid to just hold this tension for no good reason. It actually receives the signals from central nervous system telling it to contract. So if the central nervous system still sends the signals to the muscle to contract, guess what's going to happen? You stretch it, and it will snap back. As a matter of fact, it may even snap back, shorten even more. Why? A couple of weeks ago, or maybe last week, I mentioned in one of my videos this spindle. It's the nerve ending inside the muscle tissue that perceives the degree of stretch of the muscle. And if the muscle tissue is being stretched, the spindle will send a signal of alarm to the central nervous system. Hey, pay attention here, this muscle is compromised. It's getting overstretched, and it may get torn. Well, nobody wants torn muscles. So what's the central nervous system going to do? It's going to send a signal to the muscle to contract, to prevent the tear. Well, when the muscle receives the signal to contract, what does it do? It contracts. It becomes shorter, which is the opposite of what we're trying to do when we stretch it, right? When we stretch it, we hope that the muscle will become longer. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. And instead, that muscle becomes shorter. And that's basically what happens to a lot of people who stretch. Most athletes think that they need to stretch to become more flexible. Most martial artists do the same thing. Pretty much 100% of yogis do that. Basically, everyone keeps thinking that if they just do enough stretching, they're going to get more flexible. Well, basically, if you keep doing the same thing and expect different results, that's a clear sign of insanity. I'm not going to say that all people who do yoga, all people who do martial arts or any other types of sports are crazy, but there is a little bit of craziness in that misunderstanding that stretching is not the way to improve the flexibility of the muscle. We need to address the reasons why the muscle is tense. We need to make it so that the central nervous system would stop sending so many signals of contraction to that muscle, so that the muscle would actually relax. When the muscle relaxes, then it lengthens. Naturally, organically, becomes longer. When the muscle becomes longer, that's when you become more flexible. Well, that sounds really good, right? We just need to figure out how to make it so that the central nervous system would become less agitated and would stop sending so many signals of contraction to the muscle group. Well, how do we do that? Well, maybe we need to stop sending so many signals of alarm to that central nervous system so that it would not send the signals to contract to the muscle. How do we stop sending alarm signals? We actually need to shorten the muscle so that the spindle, that nerve ending in the muscle, would stop sending alarm signals. It's like if your house is filled up with smoke, disconnecting a smoke alarm is not the way to go, right? The way to go is probably to get rid of smoke and whatever causes the smoke in the first place. So basically, that's what we learn to do. We learn to backtrack, kind of trace back the origins of the issue. What is the root cause? Just trying to mitigate the symptoms is never sufficient and basically just suppresses the experience of discomfort. If we take painkillers, if we numb it out with some lotions and potions that people use to basically numb the part of the body that hurts, if we apply ice or various other things that people do, including massage. I don't want to say massage is ineffective. Some applications of body work and manual therapy can be very effective. As a matter of fact, some of them are part of my repertoire. I teach them in the context of the magic of touch. We actually learn how to apply magical touch abilities that provide exactly that, relaxation and healing, clearing the energy blockages and allowing the natural flow of blood and lymph and qi to come into the part of the body that has been afflicted and provide healing. Healing is insider job. Healing is not something that happens as a result of therapeutic intervention. Healing is what happens when the body starts restoring homeostasis. So how do we make that happen? Well, we need to first stop doing that which causes harm. And in this case, if what causes harm is the agitation of the central nervous system, we need to stop agitating it. And basically, we need to make it so that the spindle and the muscle group in question would stop sending signals of alarm. So how do we do that? Well, we literally need to shorten the muscle. For example, if it's the QL, I'm going to bring my fists to this lower back area where the QLs are located, between the 12th rib and the top of the pelvis. And then I'm going to apply gentle pressure forward and down while I'm leaning back into extension. I'm going to look at the ceiling for the time being. I'm putting my lower back into extension and literally shorten that muscle. I bring the 12th rib closer to the pelvis. Now, that's what that muscle was trying to do all along. It was trying to bring the 12th rib to the pelvis. That's what muscles do when they contract. They bring one end of the muscle closer to the other. And what we do learn right now is we help that muscle manifest its dream. If the dream of that muscle was to become shorter, to bring one end of it closer to the other end, we help it achieve exactly that. And when the muscle experiences that manifestation of its dream, it will become happy. It will stop sending signals of alarm to the central nervous system. It will stop complaining that it's being stretched, because it's not stretched. Quite on the contrary, it's being shortened or compacted, if you will. Now, it may not feel quite the same on one side or the other, so you can kind of experiment and rock a little bit from side to side. You can experiment with turning a little bit to the right and to the left. You will feel that maybe the right side is not quite the same as the left side or vice versa. And what we're going to do is we are going to give more attention to that side that needs more attention. Pain is a cry for help, if you will. And so we clench the fists and we apply pressure with the fists in the lower back, just like so. And then we rock from side to side. And if one side feels more tense than the other, apply a bit more pressure on that side. The idea is to apply pressure not just with the knuckles, but the entire flat part of the fist. So we don't want to apply pressure just with the knuckles because, well, first of all, probably you will apply too much pressure and will be hurting yourself. And secondly, the idea of this particular exercise is not to just apply pressure on any particular part. That's the magic of touch. That's where we learn how to apply pressure in points rather than whole areas. Right now, we're not doing that. We're just applying pressure on the whole area, basically shortening the muscle to feel what it's like to release the tension. How do you know that the tension gets released? Well, the tissue becomes softer under your hands. You can wiggle your fists a little bit to feel what it feels like, and if it feels softer and it's not hurting anymore, or there is less discomfort, well, then you've achieved the desired result. Often that will also coincide with a sense of relaxation throughout the whole body, because the whole central nervous system becomes less agitated. And when it's less agitated, it sends fewer signals of contraction to many other muscles throughout the body, including your breathing muscle, your diaphragm. Well, if your diaphragm receives less signals of contraction, it becomes more relaxed too. When your diaphragm becomes more relaxed, what happens? Is it easier to breathe or more difficult? That's right, it's easier. And you may have a sigh of relief, or you may notice how your breathing becomes deeper and smoother, or you may start yawning, which is a fantastic proof positive that you become more relaxed. And then you explore what it's like to go to the left, but you don't go very much. You don't go very far. You don't want to stretch the right side muscles that we just relaxed. You get to the edge of the comfort zone, which you need to be mindful about, so you don't cross over. And then you start moving along the edge. Notice what I'm doing? I'm just wiggling. I'm basically exploring what it's like to be on the edge of the comfort zone by moving a little bit one side to the other side, kind of skirting that edge of the comfort zone, maybe even in a circular manner. It's like imagine arriving to the wall of the bubble, but not puncturing the bubble wall. You arrive to the wall of the bubble, and then you start moving along that wall of the bubble, exploring what it's like to be on the surface of that wall. Well, that's what we do in a context of exploration of our edge of a comfort zone, or we officially call it range of motion. Basically, we get to the edge of the range of motion, and we don't want to cause ourselves any more trouble by stretching, but we want to explore what it's like to be on the edge. And the longer you spend time exploring what it's like to be on the edge of the comfort zone, the more you get comfortable there, the more you get used to being on that edge. And by doing so, your comfort zone organically expands, including that area that used to be outside of the comfort zone, now it becomes within. That means that from that point on, you will actually have more mobility or more flexibility without doing a stitch of stretching. Now that's exactly the smart way to go, because we did the opposite of causing ourselves to stretch reflex. Now how does it relate to the strength training? Well, once you release the tension in the muscle, it doesn't mean that you should keep it relaxed forever, because you actually need to train it. And to train it means to send the signals to contract. But now you're going to do it consciously. You see, if you held undue tension on your muscles, I bet it was not a conscious tension. You are not thinking, oh, I'm going to tense up that muscle of the back now. That quadratus lumborum, man, I'm going to just send the signals to contract to that quadratus lumborum muscle. Probably not. It was an unconscious tension that you were not doing on purpose. But now we're going to learn how to send these signals of contraction on purpose. That means that you will be able to contract that muscle at will, and when you no longer need that tension, you will stop tensing up. Because if you do this consciously, you can also stop doing it consciously. You see, if you were sending the signals of contraction unconsciously before, you couldn't stop it because you didn't even know that you were doing it. But if you do it consciously, then you have freedom of choice to keep doing it or to quit. And you can even modulate the level of intensity. Now that is a really smart way to train, because then you become the connoisseur of tension or the efficacy of use of your body. You literally can grade the degrees of tension or intensity of contraction of your muscle. So if you go to full capacity, 100%, well, by definition, it's 100 on a scale from 1 to 100. If you go only half as much, well, that would be 50%. If you go quarter as much, it would be only 25%. You can go more, for example, go to 75%. So there's 3/4 of intensity. Now, right now it may not make a lot of sense because you haven't experienced it. So this is going to be your homework, my friends. I encourage you to actually experiment with it and develop your own gradation. It's going to be completely subjective, and that's okay. Because you're the only one who knows what it feels like to contract that muscle fully to 100%. And I encourage you to do this very mindfully so that you don't push yourself over the edge and create a spasm. So maybe in the beginning, when you're calibrating the scale, you don't even want to go all the way to 100%. Maybe go to 80 or maximum 90% to be on the safe side, okay? When your muscle receives training, you hardly ever need to go to 100% at all. Why? Because 100% means you can only contract it once. It's like if you lift heavy weights. The maximum weight that you can lift, you can only do it once. If you can do it twice or 3 times, it means it's not maximum amount of weight that you can lift. So the same applies to everything else. If you engage in training where you contract and relax that muscle numerous times, you only need to go to 70, maybe 75% of its full capacity. You don't have to push it much further. And basically that means that you will be able to train it over a period of time because you're not exerting full capacity, you're not working only so that you can do it once. It also means you will develop the sense of precision in terms of how much you tense up. For example, if you've done it 4, 5, 6 times and you feel like, wow, I'm getting tired, or that muscle is getting tired, you still want to do this a few extra times, but tone down the intensity. So maybe from 70, drop the intensity down to maybe 60 or even 50%. That means you're going to be able to train your central nervous system to gauge how much signals of contraction to send to that muscle. And when you no longer need it, you will train your central nervous system to cease or stop sending signals of contraction to that muscle in question, so that we'll be able to relax. It's the opposite of what most people experience after training. When you lift weights or do other types of exercises, usually you train and pump the muscles, and then now you're tired, and when you go home, your muscles are probably burning. and stiff and tense. And you probably feel like massaging them because they feel like ropes inside of them. We'll address the ropes in a future Q&A session. But the idea is that after people lift weights, they usually don't become relaxed. They actually become more tense than before the exercise, right? That's because the central nervous system sent the signals of contraction and didn't quit. And maybe some of those signals also didn't quite make it to the muscle tissue. Sometimes the signal doesn't go straight as crow flies. It goes on a loop. It takes its sweet time to percolate down to the muscle fiber that it's supposed to contract. And it may take hours for that signal to actually reach the muscle fiber that needs to contract. That's why you continue being tense afterwards. It's because those muscles and the nerves connections are not as clear as they could be. So one of the reasons why we train the way we train, we do it slowly, very carefully, calibrating our level of intensity, and develop a clear communication between the central nervous system and the muscle group in question, so that when we choose to contract it, we contract it, and we have the strength we need. We choose to relax, we stop sending signals of contraction, and we don't have a lot of signals percolating and still telling the muscle to contract hours later. Maybe a few minutes later, but very quickly you become more relaxed. That's exactly the feeling that most people report when they train with me. They work out, and then they stop, and then they feel more relaxed as compared to the way they felt before the workout. Now that is a smart way to train. We train smart instead of hard, and we also learn how to become more relaxed afterwards, which facilitates the blood flow, which brings the nutrients to the muscle, oxygen to it, and also energy doesn't get blocked. One of the main reasons of health issues that Oriental medicine understands is that there are energy blockages that block the flow of qi in the body. Nobody does it to you. You do it to yourself by tensing up and holding this tension unconsciously. That unconscious chronic tension is what creates energy blockages, which wreak havoc in your health. If you don't want that, you need to learn how to stop holding that tension. And if it is unconscious tension, you have to make it conscious so that you can actually exercise the freedom of choice. You have a sense of self-agency about it. Does it make sense? Sorry, can you say it again?
I lost that awareness. Some of it because I lost its sort of routine that I had working out.
Yeah.
The coronavirus affected it, but I think some of it's become unconscious.
Well,
I'm stressing, I'm contracting, I'm tightening, I'm going beyond my comfort zone, all of that.
mm-hmm.
But it's not, I'm not consciously aware of it until, as you said, hours later or the next day even.
Right.
And it's like, oh shit.
Exactly.
And it went too far, so.
Yeah.
I need to slow down. I need to slow down, actually, and pay attention. Thank you. Thank
Slowing
you.
down. You are so welcome. Paying attention, slowing down, being more mindful is not just using the big buzzwords that are popular these days. It's actually embodying these principles. That's what I teach in practice. How to walk the talk. How to embody these principles so we can become a walking manifestation of mindfulness instead of just talking about it.
Right.
You know, I have a number of friends and fellow teachers of meditation and mindfulness and Qigong. Some of them talk a really good talk. I mean, with all due respect, for example, Eckhart Tolle. He's like the world-renowned expert on mindfulness and presence. But if you look at him, he's crooked. He's tense and scrunched over. He's like a troll. Why? Because he has so much unconscious tension on his body. Why? Because he actually brought to public awareness the term pain body. but he never actually figured out how to heal it. That's exactly where I picked up right where Eckhart left off and developed the whole modality of pain body healing. Now, I received an email from a friend of mine, a well-known Qigong master, who said, pain body is not a good term. We Taoists, we love the body. We trust the body. We want the body to be respected. And when you're talking about pain body, it's like you blaming the body for pain and try to suppress it. But everyone has it. It's not even a disease. It's not like we try to get rid of it. We need to become aware of it, become mindful of it, and get a handle on it. Basically, you're not going to throw away your body. You develop a more friendly relationship with your body. So instead of pain body, it becomes dream body. Now that's a different story for another Q&A session. I teach how to develop dream body, and it's not what you think it is. That's why we study the art of dream yoga. Holding pattern is what you do to yourself by holding tension unconsciously. Now, what do we do about that? Well, the easy way to understand it is that you just simply make that tension conscious and understand how you can contract and relax the muscles at will, like we just explored today, so that you can choose to stop tensing those muscles when you no longer need tension in them. How do you do that? You shorten that muscle, you lengthen it. But by lengthening, I mean also you can engage the extensors. So basically what you do is you just do this against the resistance of the muscle's antagonists. It's like, imagine you're moving through molasses or some other viscous substance. When you do that, you're engaging those muscles in exercise that perhaps they never experienced in your entire life. Both muscles, antagonists and protagonists, the extensors and flexors, will be working against each other. Both of them will actually receive some training. Both of them will get tired. The weaker ones will get tired first. But the most important thing is to learn how to release the tension little by little. So for example, if you begin with 70 or 80% of full capacity, then drop it down to 60 or even 50 and further down to 40%, then go further down to 30. You still continue contracting these muscles against each other, and then drop it down to 20%. You can continue still, don't stop there. Go to 10% of full capacity. At 10%, that's a relatively relaxed wiggling, but you're doing it still with full awareness. Okay, I'm sending the signals of contraction just at 10%. If you're ambitious, see if you can get to 5%. 5% is the normal muscle tone. If you don't have any undue tension, that would be pretty much the degree of tension in the muscles that is considered the muscle tone. And that's okay to have it, but if you achieve that consciously, then you have a handle on it. And you can actually be mindful of how you distribute weight on your feet. So we want to learn how we distribute weight and find the center of the foot. Like if you measure the length of the foot and divide that length in half, then find that point of halfway between the tips of the toes and the heel. That would be the center of the foot. Imagine a tall building like a skyscraper. If the weight of the building doesn't fall onto the center of its footprint, it's not going to be a stable building. It's going to be a wobbly building or a crooked building, and just lean on it and it will fall over. If the center of the mass of the building falls onto the footprint of the building, it's going to be much more stable. Well, that applies to the human body. If you distribute weight on the centers of your feet, you become more grounded. And that eliminates the need for those muscles to contract. But if they've been holding that tension unconsciously for years, which is what most people hold, the holding patterns for a long time, and so that's when that mindful contraction and relaxation comes handy. You can actually train them to stop holding the tension.